Hello class, and welcome to Chapter 2. In this lecture we're going to be discussing changes that are driving globalization. So let's get started. Globalization is a trend that's moving forward no matter what. There's nothing that a single country or organization or person can do to stop the growing trend of globalization and the interconnectedness among people, countries, organizations, commerce, and various markets across the world. However, we can look at how globalization is developing and notice some trends that are taking place. And we'll discuss a number of those trends a little bit later in the lecture. But it's important to note that the United States has enjoyed a position at the top of the food market when it comes to global markets. That's changing, however. In 2005, 6 of the largest companies in the world were American organizations. By 2010, only 2 of those companies still remain on the top 10 list. So what's happening is that other countries and their economic power is really beginning to show and take place, and that wealth distribution around the world is beginning to change and to shift. Now you may ask, well, what's driving this change? What's driving the fact that America is no longer at the top of the mountain, or at least our position at the top of the mountain is being challenged? Well, you have falling trade barriers and technological changes. Trade barriers are rules that various governments put in place to govern how they trade and exchange commerce and products and money with other countries around the world. Most notably, if a country has a very protective-oriented trade position, then they would erect tariffs or trade barriers. They'd make it harder for, say, China to import goods into America, or for Brazil to send goods into America. We would have trade barriers in place. Now, there are a number of organizations, including the WTO, the World Trade Organization, whose sole purpose is to reduce trade barriers and to allow the free flowing of money and capital and products from one country to another country. In other words, to try to get the world to act as a single global market in commerce. The overall belief in general, and held by many, and if not most economists, is that the fewer trade barriers there are, the greater the global economy would be, the greater sharing goods, and basically the ability to to increase or improve the plight of the average man across the world is better. Another trend that's driving change is technological changes. Technology is moving forward at a lightning pace. Most notably, the thing that's driven the most technological advancement would be the internet, and the internet's facilitation of sharing information across long distances instantaneously. The ability for the internet to allow people to communicate virtually instantaneously and to reduce the cost of people communicating over long distances. There are a number of other technologies, such as production-oriented technologies, robots, AI, artificial intelligence, that are also driving significant change globally. The number of multinational organizations across the world, so this is in every country, has increased dramatically, and this is increasing the overall amount of competition that's taking place on a global market. And this is important because as organizations grow, they need to find places to sell their products. They need to find places to make their products at a cheaper price. So the fact that organizations are reaching out to other marketplaces or other countries is because they want to diversify their consumer base. So America, for example, has right around 350 to 360 million people in it, and that's a great market, and we definitely are a country that has a lot of wealth in it. However, India has 1.2 billion people, and if we were able to sell our products into India, man, imagine how much growth we could have in our products. So increasing the diversity of your clients and your customer base, tapping into markets that have never been tapped into before, strengthening up and diversifying your supply chain. So that means I may be getting some parts from India, some parts from China, some parts from Brazil, and I'm assembling my car in America. Well, the chances are that some major problem is going to happen in all 3 countries is fairly low, right? So that diversity allows my supply chain to be much more consistent and much more predictable. It's important to note that with these changes taking place, emerging markets are increasing in their power and their influence on a global level. And what do I mean by emerging markets? These are markets that have typically been considered lower, not as productive. The countries are not as wealthy. They may have poverty or, other issues going on, right? Civil unrest and things like that. But there's presently a shift of power that's moving from the West, meaning like the United States, towards the East, and moving from the North towards the South. So when we say the East, we're talking about countries like China and other countries that are in the Asia Pacific area, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But you'll notice that Africa, or what's commonly called as EMEA, EMEA, is Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. But here in Africa, those countries are gaining more and more influence. If you look down south, look at the U.S. and go directly south, you'll see that we're talking about South America. So Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and a lot of other countries. The economic power and productivity of those markets is increasing in its influence. In fact, many organizations forecast that China will replace the United States as the top economy in the world by 2050. Additionally, India is coming up to a close second to the United States. And I want to point something out here that's really interesting, is that the United States, once again, only has 350 million people in the U.S. China has 1.4 billion. And to think that it takes 1.4 billion to individuals to produce the same type of economic power and influence as a country with 350 million really speaks to the level of wealth and affluency held by the average American citizen. As a matter of fact, Asia Pacific area is expected to account for 52% of global GDP. That's gross domestic product. Now, you may not be familiar with some of those terms. So this slide presents a breakdown of how organizations, multinational and global companies, tend to look at the world. And we break it down into three large classifications. So you have the Americas, which consist of North and South America. You have EMEA, which consists of Europe, the Middle East, ME, and Africa being the A. That's called EMEA. And then you have Asia Pacific, which includes China, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and a lot of those Eastern type of countries. So as we're going through the semester and we're talking, we may use the term Americas, EMEA, or Asia Pacific region, and I want you to be familiar with what those mean. China currently is America's largest creditor, which means that America owes the most. When it comes to how much debt America has, who do we owe that money to? We owe that money to China. And that's because China took deliberate steps to purchase American debt, to buy bonds and everything directly from our government treasury. So the United States actually we owe China the most money out of anyone else in the world that we owe money to. So if we really were to get into some kind of war, China could use the power they have over our credit, the power they have over the money that we owe them. They could call the notes due. And that could have a crippling effect on the U.S. economy. So China could have some significant impact on the U.S. without even lifting a single gun or firing a single missile. Emerging markets are growing at approximately 3% faster than the U.S. market. At this rate, the emerging countries will account for nearly 2/3 of the world's output by 2030. And what do I mean by emerging markets? We're talking about China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and a host of others. But China, India, and Brazil, they really are driving significant growth throughout the global market. There are a number of trends. We're going to talk about 4 of them that are affecting globalization and how globalization is developing and emerging. The first trend is the population. The overall global population is growing much faster than scientists actually predicted. Currently, we have over 7.5 billion people in the world. So as of 2017, 7.5 billion people, and this rate is growing faster, much faster than scientists actually expected. You can use this link here to actually click on and check out the world clock, and this kind of tells you how many people are being born into the world at any given second of time. And it's a real-time clock that shows you. It's really quite cool. The second trend is in the middle class, individuals. The second trend is the rise of the middle class. Okay, so the middle class globally. Now we know in the United States we have an issue with the middle class shrinking, but globally the middle class is increasing. There are more people who are moving from a state of poverty into the middle class. Now what does this mean? People who are born who are in the middle class, most of them right now, they weren't born there. They had to work their way up there, which means that they originally they didn't have all the material possessions that they needed to ensure a decent survival, to ensure a decent quality of life. However, throughout their life and throughout the work that they've done, they've managed to move up. So now they're at a place where they can begin to provide a decent lifestyle for themselves and or their children. And the idea there is that their children will be born into a middle class and also continue going into a middle class. When we talk about a rising middle class, it generally is a very strong indicator that you have a healthy economy, whether it's just a single country or the overall world. So the fact that the middle class is growing is a very good thing. There are some side effects of that, though. Namely, the middle class has a tremendous purchasing power. They are arguably the largest consumers in the world. So if I'm a multinational organization, I really want to keep a close eye on those countries that have growing middle classes because I want to sell my products into them. I want to sell them my cars. I want to sell them my trucks. I want to sell them my appliances. Because they're excited about making those purchases and they will make them far more than the wealthy people who already have them or the poor people who can't afford them. So the growing middle class, which is expected to be 3.2 billion by 2020, represents a significant opportunity for business and commerce throughout the world. Third change is that populations are aging. Without fail, there's a trend that in developing countries, people are having fewer children. And we may say, well, why is this? Well, it could be that child mortality rates are low, meaning that the average person who gets pregnant, they're able to bring that child all the way through the birth process successfully. Okay, whereas in countries that are more emerging or have worse economic plights, you have higher infant mortality. So they just don't have the medical care. The other thing is medical care. So as people are getting older, they can live longer. So in developed countries, you have this thing where if there is a child that's conceived, the likelihood of it being born is very high. And then also, people who are born are living a lot longer. So you see this trend where people are having fewer children, and the need to have more children also changes. So you'll hear people in developed countries talking about, oh, it's so expensive to have children, to have a family. I couldn't afford to have a large family. Whereas in emerging markets, having a larger family is almost a prerequisite to success. Because the more people you have who are working, contributing to the household, the more successful that household can be. And if you have a high rate of infant mortality, it may mean that a family may have to have 6 or 7 children in order to have a family of 5, for example. But in the developed economies, things are changing. So people are living longer, they're having fewer children, the cost to have children, to have a family increases. So the demographics are changing. So right now that shift of power, because it shifts to emerging markets because they have a large work base. They have a large group of young people who are ready to work, willing to work, and that are expecting to move up into that middle class. So it's very predictable to see how jobs would flow away from developed countries, particularly jobs that focus on labor or that are intense or repetitive or boring or require low levels of education. How those jobs would flow to emerging markets who have a plethora of human resources ready and willing to take those jobs and work them very hard. The fourth trend is urbanization. As populations are increasing, people have to find a place to live. And increasingly, what they're doing is that people are moving to larger cities. They're moving into urban areas. And this is good and bad. It has both positive and negatives. One of the positive things is that if I am a multinational organization and I want to sell my product and I try to target this emerging market or where young people are, or new families that are moving into middle class, an urban area is an ideal spot because people are concentrated together. I can get my message out there and I can hit a lot of people at one point in time. The bad thing about it is that as countries begin to become more and more urban, meaning that we have people uh, congested in cities, you tend to have increased discrimination, increases in violence, and increases in pollution. So the effect of these very urban markets on global warming and everything else is pretty significant. If you look at this slide here, you'll see just a list of the top 6 largest cities in the world, right? Shanghai, 24 million people in Shanghai. Beijing, 18.5 million people. To give you a bit of contrast, New York City, which is arguably one of the largest, if not the largest city in the United States, is 8 million people. And that's including all 5 boroughs. Okay? So Shanghai and Beijing are more than twice the size of New York. If you look at Karachi in Pakistan, Istanbul, Dhaka, Tokyo with 13 million. Now, notice there's a trend here. None of these cities are U.S. cities. All these cities are over in the East. So when we talk about the shift of power coming from the West and it's moving east, this is one of the major driving factors as to why. So we talked about urbanization just a little bit ago. There is another point I want to mention to that, is that as individuals move into these cities and become more and more urban, some of the benefits are healthcare. Typically in larger cities, you see better hospitals. So because of the concentrated number of people, there's more wealth there. People can invest in hospitals. They can invest in infrastructure because there's people there to help pay for those costs, those expenses. The opportunity to earn wealth is present there. You also have higher literacy rates, and people who live in the urban areas are more likely to live longer. And that's a direct result of the medical care. And we talked about the drawbacks being, inequality, discrimination, and increased pollution. And the last change we're going to talk about here is technological changes and how that's affected globalization. The internet has accelerated change in almost innumerable ways. The fact that we can share information almost instantaneously, we could have meetings with someone in a different country and interact real time, live to video, showing one another. We could see body language and see facial expressions and those kind of things. It's also empowered consumers with increased knowledge. So now people, if you want to go buy that car, you can go online, spend a good hour or so, and have all the details and facts and the overall performance of that vehicle to help you now go out and negotiate to buy that car. So it's empowered consumers with knowledge. It's made information more readily available. And it's done it in a real-time manner. So as trends and things develop and change, individuals, consumers, as well as business professionals, they can keep on top of those changes in a real-time format. Mobile technology has also had a significant impact on globalization, specifically in emerging markets. So if you think about it, the United States is a developed market. We've been having various technologies for a long time. Our infrastructure, likewise, has been around for a long time. So if you think about it, the United States has a lot of telephone poles, telephone wires. There are significant investments in our communication infrastructure throughout the U.S. So as technologies begin to emerge where all these wires are not necessary, all these telephone poles are no longer necessary, you'll find that organizations are reluctant and they'll be more resistant to change because of the financial investment they've made in the current infrastructure. And to see these new technologies come out is a threat to them. We say, okay, well, if they're going to sell towers, then what about the billions of dollars that we poured into lines, telephone lines running all across the United States? What about the money we put into the infrastructure? Is that all for nothing at this point? Now, when you look at emerging markets, they don't have all that infrastructure built in. They don't have the legacy of organizations there trying to hold on to what they have or what they've been doing in the past. So it makes it easier for change. So mobile phones and mobile technology has been able to go into these emerging markets and flourish without the competition of legacy organizations. Technology is changing the nature of work. So it's not just the internet, it's not just mobile technology, but you also have things like artificial intelligence, which is starting to replace jobs of some not doctors, but people that assist doctors. They want to examine a certain image and see, was there a cancer? Well, this artificial technology can provide the first set of recommendations. So people who were doing that originally could be out of a job. You have technology, automated technology, which helps in manufacturing plants. So one machine can work 24 hours a day, whereas I'd have to hire 3 individuals and work 3 shifts in order to have a human work 24 hours a day. In addition to that, the machine's productivity and the consistency of their productivity is far superior to that than of a normal person. So there are some significant benefits in terms of adding adding machine technology into the production. All you got to do is take a look at Amazon and see how they've integrated machines into helping them from everything to packaging their products and shipping their products in order to drive down their employee and labor costs. So these are some of the trends that are taking place. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, feel free to let me know. And until next time, have a good day.